I'm Steve Webber, and this is our new release called Grenache Wizardry. As the climate warms, it's going to be interesting to see where people go with varieties. Certain varieties really enjoy, the hot weather. Others don't, and areas like McLaren Vale and Barossa and Heathcote, those sort of warmer areas that traditionally produce big red wine, the varieties, the traditional varieties like Cabernet and Shiraz and Semillon in terms of white, may well one day be replaced by Grenache Blanc and Grenache Noir and some of those other varieties. So one of the great things about Grenache, it does have a history in Australia. In the Barossa and McLaren Vale, there's some very, very old vine Grenache that were planted. I'm not sure whether they were planted for red or for fortified. They were certainly used for fortified in the early days. But when Grenache is made properly, particularly in the traditional red form, it is sort of blue collar Pinot Noir. It is sort of the lighter, more fragrant wine out of a traditionally fuller style, red wine regions, like Heathcote and McLaren Vale and Barossa. So, I think it has a fantastic place in Australian sort of, winemaking circles. Some of my favourite medium-bodied reds at the moment are straight Grenache. So, having been excited about Grenache, one of the things we had to choose, I suppose, was where to make its home for us, and we chose Heathcote. Heathcote is, of course, 2 hours north of Melbourne in Victoria in Australia, and its fame really came from the soil types. This red Cambrian, basalt-based soil is the primary soil type of the region. So one of the things about this sort of very old red Cambrian, basalt soil is very, very free draining soil, quite vigorous. It is really amazing. So yeah, it's quite interesting that this is the soil profile from here, and you can see these little sort of grain-like pieces of greenstone, which is a feature of the soil down there. But it does, because of its free draining nature, it does dry out quite quickly. But a lot of people don't actually understand that there's an old seabed underneath this sort of volcanic activity as it bursts through this seam of sedimentary rock, and a lot of that is limestone. It's a lovely reservoir for moisture. So if the vine roots can get down through this profile and start utilising some of the limestone, it's a real advantage. It almost sort of drought proofs these vineyards, because it does store a lot of moisture all year round. So winter time, during the refill stage, it fills that sort of profile and things like that with water, and then it really doesn't go away. It just sort of stays there as a little reservoir. They say that you get this sense of minerality, this sense of sort of saltiness in the wine, or salinity from these sort of these limestone-based soils. In some of our vineyards, this limestone is quite close to the surface. It might be, say, 200 to 300 millimetres under this stuff as the topsoil, and in other vineyards it might be 2 or 3 metres down. So Heathcote it's about 100 kilometres long, which in the scheme of things, we can see massive climate variations from the very south to the very north, and it's a little bit like the Rhone Valley in that regard. The Rhone Valley is a little longer than that. I think the Rhone might be 200 kilometres long, but you can be making wine that is very similar to Côte Rôtie, which is very aromatic, medium-bodied red wine, to wines which are very much like the south of France, with lots of Grenache in them and things like that. Shiraz, Grenache, Carignan. But it is, of course, flipped over in the northern hemisphere. So Grenache Wizardry is perhaps an odd name, but we sort of feel that we love the term that Grenache is the wizard of the warmer climates. It really is, fantastic. So this is our Grenache Blanc. It's our first vintage, 2019. It's from the Northern Heathcote region. It's all hand-picked. We whole bunch pressed it, and it was fermented in some amphora, clay pots. We let it, ferment with the natural yeast which occurs on the grapes, and then we transferred it to some older wooden casks. The Grenache Rosé is very much that sort of pale, dry, Provençal style of wine. Very typical Grenache. Grenache is perhaps most famous for rosé in the south of France or in sort of places like Provence. But Grenache is maybe the most widely planted rosé on the planet. It's again fermented in casks, wooden vats, and again we like to sort of let it go naturally if we possibly can, using the existing sort of ambient yeast from the vineyard. And it's that pale, dry textural style. The Grenache Wizardry Red, or Noir we like to call it, is again, it's hand-picked. We generally fermented in some open sort of stainless steel fermenters. It then goes to some larger, older wooden sort of vats for storage and maturation. We're not after a lot of oak in this wine. We're just after this sort of soft, gentle, plump fruit characteristic, and just sort of real drinkability with the table. Okay, I've got my very able assistant winemaker, daughter Kate, here with me, and we were just going to run through some of these wines with you, and maybe get a few comments from Kate. So we might pour the Grenache Blanc to start with. What I guess we're looking for in this is some of the sort of really briny, slightly salty sort of things. We sort of made it with food in mind, that we sort of thought maybe washing down some freshly shucked oysters might be pretty cool. But I think there's that nice combination of a little bit of fruit character, but not too much. For me, wine is about it's not about being too obvious all the time. Sometimes with these sort of wines, you're looking for a bit of subtlety with just little hints of brine, or little hints of fruit character, or sometimes a little bit of sort of dried fruit sort of characteristics. And I think because you really wanted to complement food, maybe not necessarily take it over. Okay, we'll try the rosé. Fairly pale colour.
It's good.
So I guess with rosé, one of the things that I feel about rosé is it really does need to be that pale, really pale, dry colour. I think we don't want sort of too much fruit character in it, but just sort of a little bit of rose petal and some of those sort of characteristics. What if I said to you, Kate, what sort of food and things like that would you like to have with this?
I don't think you need any food with it. I think just a warm sunny day in a nice shady spot, sit back, drink and enjoy.
Okay, great. Well, there you go. Don't need any food with this one either. Some Noir. So I would have actually liked to have put Grenache Noir on the label, but maybe that's a little too obvious with the dark arts thrown in. So, what are the sorts of things, those lovely French steaks we sometimes have down at the beach?
The big cassoulet or something, just a sort of slow cooked big pot of food.
Absolutely, yeah, fantastic. With all these wines, I think they are sort of wines that you can put in a carafe, something like this. Maybe take the soil out of it first, but put some of these wines in a carafe, put them on the table, be non-pretentious and things like that. Because they are really lovely, wines for family and for the table and for great friends.
And they'll vanish quickly.
And they vanish very quickly.